I stood on the front porch, arms crossed, as Patricia Langston's voice cut sharp through the humid afternoon air. "You have 72 hours to remove your niece from this property, Daniel. The HOA rules don't make exceptions for unauthorized occupants, even minors." She smiled like she held all the cards. "Ignore this, and you'll face fines escalating daily." Her tone was smug, dismissive, like she believed this was an open and shut case. I let the heat settle in, watching her carefully. "Patricia, you're wrong. Emily's federal disability ID protects her from exactly this kind of eviction." Her eyes flickered for just a moment, but she masked it with a scoff. "We'll see what the police say." That's when I dropped the quiet bomb. "They won't touch this because I'm an engineer who reviewed every inch of this community's accessibility compliance, and your eviction attempt violates the Fair Housing Act." The room shifted. Power was no longer all hers. This wasn't just a threat. It was a blueprint for her failure. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. My name is Daniel Morales, civil engineer, protector of my family's legacy. This house was my sister's before she passed, and her daughter, Emily, is more than just family. She's the reason I'm standing here, fighting Patricia's iron grip over our neighborhood. The old oak tree by the entrance, witness to decades of our lives, stands tall because it endures storms. Like us. Emily's condition requires specialized accommodations that Patricia's eviction notice completely ignores. It's not about rules on paper. It's about her right to a safe home where she can thrive. Losing this place would tear apart everything my sister built and break my niece's fragile world. That's why this fight is personal. Where are you watching from? Because Patricia just chose the wrong family to bully, and this is only the beginning. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. I stepped back inside as Patricia lingered on the porch, glancing around like she owned more than just the letter she held. The air was thick with tension and the faint scent of fresh-cut grass from the community lawn. Outside, the old oak tree swayed gently in the breeze, leaves whispering secrets I intended to protect. Her calls to the HOA board had triggered a wave of similar threats across the neighborhood. Neighbors who once smiled politely at her now exchanged worried glances behind closed doors. The community center was no longer just a meeting place. It was a battleground for our rights. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my tablet, my engineering background making it easy to spot every procedural flaw. The notice she served lacked the required accommodations clause. It flagrantly ignored federal protections, and worse, ignored the humanity behind the law. That afternoon, I walked the neighborhood, sensing the invisible line Patricia had crossed. Doors closed a little tighter, voices hushed just a bit lower. Fear wasn't always loud. It hid in silence. But I wasn't going to let that silence win. At the edge of the cul-de-sac, the sunlight glinted through the oak's leaves. I reached out, brushing the rough bark with a steady hand, drawing strength from its resilience. This tree had weathered storms for decades. It was a symbol of endurance, of family roots running deep. I knew then that protecting Emily was about more than a house or a tree. It was about preserving the soul of our community and standing tall against anyone who tried to cut us down. Tonight, Patricia would find out just how deep those roots ran. The HOA Community Center felt colder than usual, even with the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Rows of folding chairs were arranged neatly, but the tension hanging in the air was anything but tidy. Patricia Langston sat at the head of the room, her posture rigid, face sharp with authority. Around her, a handful of homeowners shifted uneasily, whispering in low tones, eyes darting between her and the back exit as if waiting for the meeting to end. I took a seat near the middle, tablet in hand, prepared to listen and to learn. The community had been whispering about how the HOA's iron grip had tightened over the past months, but this was my first real glimpse of the pattern in action. Patricia was relentless, enforcing rules with an unforgiving hand, her demands stretching far beyond the bylaws she was supposed to uphold. The first order of business was Emily's eviction notice. Patricia laid it out plainly, her voice carrying through the room with an edge that brooked no argument. "We have a responsibility to maintain property values and community standards. Unauthorized occupants undermine that." Some homeowners nodded, others looked uneasy. What struck me? was how many others had faced similar crackdowns lately. Fines for minor landscaping violations, threats over paint colors, demands to remove harmless backyard structures. A middle-aged woman near the front confessed in a quiet voice that her elderly mother was being targeted because her medical scooter didn't fit the HOA's parking rules. The crowd murmured, the unease growing, but no one dared stand up to Patricia directly. She was a seasoned politician in this neighborhood, skilled at shutting down opposition with thinly veiled smiles or sharp reminders of the rules. The community's fear was palpable. An invisible wall built of worry about fines, legal battles, and social ostracism. I noticed a few faces twisted in frustration but silenced by uncertainty. The community wasn't just divided, it was under siege by its own leaders. That was when I realized this wasn't just about Emily, or even me. Patricia's actions were a pattern, a campaign of control that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our neighborhood. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. If the HOA could treat one family like this, it could happen to any of us. The stakes were higher than I'd imagined, and the clock was ticking. After the meeting, I stepped outside into the fading light, the sounds of distant lawnmowers and children playing at the nearby park filtering through the air. The old oak tree stood sentinel at the entrance of the neighborhood, its broad branches casting long shadows on the pavement. It felt like the last unyielding witness to what was happening here. The community center was supposed to be a place of gathering, a space for neighbors to collaborate and protect shared interests. Instead, it had become a place where fears festered in silence, where Patricia's power went unchecked. That silence needed breaking. I knew I couldn't fight this alone, but I also knew I had to start somewhere. The neighbors needed to feel heard, to realize they weren't powerless. The first step was showing them the truth, making Patricia's pattern impossible to ignore. Later that evening, I caught a glimpse of Marcus Bennett in the parking lot outside the community center. His usual calm seemed strained, shoulders tense beneath his blazer. He avoided eye contact, but didn't hurry away. Something was stirring beneath the surface. An internal struggle I sensed was just beginning. I resolved to keep an eye on Marcus. If anyone on the inside was uneasy, he might be the key to shifting the balance. For now, though, the neighborhood felt like a powder keg, quiet but volatile, waiting for a spark. As I walked back to my car, the scent of fresh-cut grass and honeysuckle mingled in the warm evening air. The old oak silhouette against the sunset reminded me why this fight mattered, not just for Emily, not just for me, but for everyone who called this place home. I first noticed Marcus Bennett during that tense HOA meeting. He sat near Patricia, quiet but visibly uncomfortable. His fingers tapped rhythmically against his knee, the only sign that his mind was far from the scripted agenda. After the meeting, I caught him alone in the parking lot, his eyes scanning the darkening street, a conflicted look clouding his features. He didn't rush away when I approached. Instead, he stood still, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. "Daniel," he said quietly, voice almost breaking the silence, "this isn't right. What Patricia's doing. It's not how we should run this community." But even as he spoke, I could see the struggle playing out in his posture, the tension between loyalty to the board and an emerging conscience. Marcus had been the HOA secretary for years, trusted by Patricia, but the recent string of heavy-handed actions had unsettled him. His conflicted nature wasn't just a vague feeling, it was visible in every hesitant glance and the tight line of his mouth. That night, I found myself replaying our brief conversation. Marcus was more than a bystander. He was someone trapped between two worlds, part of the system, yet quietly questioning it. If I was going to fight Patricia, I needed allies like him. People who knew the inner workings and the loopholes Patricia was exploiting. The next day, I saw Marcus again at the local cafe, tucked in a corner, nursing a coffee, and scrolling through emails on his phone. His eyes flicked up when I walked in, wary, but not unfriendly. I slid into the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk," I said. "I think you want to do something about this, but you're scared." He sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated. Patricia's got us all on edge. The board expects loyalty, but I keep thinking, what if there's a better way?" His gaze dropped to the table, tracing invisible patterns. "I don't want to lose my job or become a target. But this isn't just about rules anymore. It's personal for a lot of people. I nodded, feeling a surge of empathy. Marcus wasn't the enemy. He was caught in the same storm. What he needed was a way out, a reason, and the right moment to stand up. We'll figure this out, I told him, together. Later, I observed Marcus more closely. In board meetings, he still nodded at Patricia's commands, but with a shadow of doubt clouding his eyes. When Patricia dismissed concerns from neighbors, Marcus hesitated before quickly agreeing, his body language betraying inner conflict. At times, he glanced at his phone, perhaps searching for something, maybe evidence or a sign of support. I could sense his growing unease, a quiet rebellion brewing beneath the surface. But fear kept him chained, fear of backlash, of losing influence, of the unknown. This wasn't just a political struggle. It was a battle against paralysis and isolation. One evening, I spotted Marcus near the old oak tree, alone and deep in thought. The way he touched the bark, fingers lightly tracing the rough surface, reminded me how much this neighborhood meant to all of us. It was more than property. It was history, memories, home. I approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "The tree's seen a lot, hasn't it?" I said softly. He looked up, a faint smile breaking through his guarded expression. "Yeah, strong, silent, kind of like us." He paused, then added, "I don't want to be silent anymore." In that moment, I realized Marcus wasn't just a conflicted witness. He was a potential ally, someone whose quiet strength could tip the scales. But he needed trust, assurance, and a way to channel his doubts into action. Our conversation ended with no promises, just an unspoken understanding. This was the beginning of something fragile, a tentative alliance forged in an uncertainty and hope. As I walked away, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows beneath the oak. The night was still, but beneath that stillness, the first stirrings of change were beginning to take root. Drop a like if you've ever felt torn between standing up and staying silent, and subscribe to see how Marcus's choice will change everything in this fight against HOA overreach. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Your voice matters in stories like this. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived taped to my front door. Thick envelope, HOA seal, and Patricia's signature printed in rigid mechanical type. The language was brutal. Ongoing non-compliance, unauthorized inhabitant, failure to remove, subject to cumulative daily fines exceeding $250 per day. Emily stood behind me in the doorway, reading over my shoulder. She didn't say a word, but her small hand gripped the back of my shirt. I felt the panic in her touch before she even said, "Are we getting kicked out?" I turned and knelt beside her. Number? Not even close. But inside, my jaw was tight. Patricia wasn't backing off. She was escalating, and she was doing it fast. I set the letter on the dining table, scanned it twice, and began annotating it with a red pen like I was grading a college exam. Missing procedural citations. No mention of disability exceptions. No reference to the required federal accommodation compliance check. She'd doubled down on the original notice, made it sound more official, more threatening, but she still hadn't bothered to make it legal, which meant she was bluffing. Again. But this time, it wasn't just to intimidate me. Patricia wanted to make an example out of my niece. She was betting no one would stand up to her if she pushed hard enough, fast enough. I stepped outside for air. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the front yard. From the curb, the old oak tree at the end of the street looked like it was bracing itself against a storm. The neighborhood was quieter than usual. I noticed fewer cars parked on the street, curtains drawn, doors closed. People were watching, waiting. Not everyone agreed with Patricia, but no one wanted to be next. That was her strategy. Isolate, escalate, then dominate. I needed to break that pattern. The next morning, I returned to the community center, not for a meeting, but to read through the HOA's posted notices and pinned bulletins. Most of it was the usual lawn care reminders, community cleanup schedules, warnings about basketball hoops. But buried at the bottom was a list of recent violations. Mine was listed by address, not name, just the house. That's how she did it. Strip the humanity away. Turn homes into case numbers. Turn people into liabilities. I took out my phone and started snapping pictures. Everything from the bulletin board, including the notices posted in the locked glass case, labeled Official HOA Communications. I had a feeling I'd need these. Back home, I opened the neighborhood Facebook group on my laptop. Patricia never posted there. She controlled the HOA newsletter, an official email list. But the private resident group was different, less filtered. I searched for keywords: eviction, Patricia, fines. What I found was a trail of frustration. Posts from other residents complaining of being threatened with fines for things like holiday decorations, garden height, driveway stains. Many had no follow-up, just abrupt removal, like someone had deleted the conversation, but some had replies. One woman named Alyssa had commented about being fined over a temporary wheelchair ramp she'd installed for her father. Said it wasn't aesthetic, she wrote. No warning, just a $300 penalty. Another man had posted about his daughter's service animal being labeled a nuisance. I reached out to them directly. I'm facing something similar. I think we need to talk. Their responses came quickly, faster than I expected. Finally, someone else who sees it. Let me know when and where. Count me in. Patricia had built her power on silence and fear. But silence only holds as long as people feel alone. As night fell, I sat on the porch with Emily, watching the street lamps flicker on one by one. She was quiet, but she leaned against me, head resting on my arm. Is this because of me? She asked. No, I said gently. It's because someone forgot what this neighborhood is supposed to be. And I intended to remind them. The next morning, I opened my inbox to find a reply from Alyssa waiting. Attached was a scan of the violation letter she'd received months ago. The same cold formatting, the same tone, the same signature. Patricia Langston. But this one included something mine didn't. A highlighted section at the bottom with small, nearly unreadable text. Requests for reasonable accommodation must be submitted using Form ADA 14 within 10 days of notice. That phrase stuck with me. Form ADA 14. It wasn't in my letter. I pulled up my own violation again, side by side. Nothing, no accommodation clause, no reference to disability law. Patricia hadn't just violated the spirit of fairness, she'd selectively removed a federally mandated clause from my niece's notice. That was more than petty oversight. That was legal negligence. I felt my pulse rise, but I kept my hand steady as I copied both letters into a single PDF. I added my annotations, highlighted the missing text, and bookmarked relevant sections of the Fair Housing Act and STA housing provisions. I didn't need to be a lawyer to spot what Patricia had done. I just needed to make sure the right people saw it. I started with documentation. As an engineer, I'd built hundreds of technical reports for inspection agencies, project managers, and federal compliance reviewers. This wasn't so different. I titled the file Comparative Violation Notice, ADA Omission, HOA Langston. Then I saved it in a shared drive and set access controls for a few trusted contacts. Next, I reached out to a disability rights advocate I'd met years ago at a design symposium. Her name was Carmen. She specialized in reviewing housing code for nonprofits and had a reputation for being blunt and meticulous. I emailed her the packet with a note. Carmen, I know this isn't your usual lane, but can you confirm whether this omission constitutes a federal compliance failure under ADA housing protections? It's affecting my 14-year-old niece. Appreciate anything you can do. She responded within 2 hours. Yes, that's not just sloppy. It's discriminatory. If she altered the language only in your letter while including ADA clauses in others, that's grounds for a HUD complaint. Want me to draft a summary statement for public release? I stared at her message for a moment. A public release. That was the crack I needed. I called Alyssa. She picked up after one ring. I was hoping you'd call, she said. I've been saving everything. Screenshots, letters, emails. We met at a quiet bench in the park, far from the prying windows of the HOA office. She handed me a manila folder and tapped the top. This isn't just your niece. Patricia's been erasing ADA sections in letters that involve medical accommodations. Quietly, selectively. A chill ran down my spine. How many? 7, maybe more. Some people moved away, others just gave in. This wasn't just an abuse of HOA power. It was targeted, repeated discrimination. Back at home, I compiled everything into a second document, pattern of selective ADA clause removal. The evidence was stacking up fast, and with Carmen's summary statement in hand, I had more than suspicion. I had professional backing. I stared at my screen as the file uploaded. I wasn't ready to send it just yet. Timing mattered. Once this went public, the gloves were off. But the plan was forming, and Patricia had no idea how close she was to being exposed by the very details she thought no one would notice. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was worried. I'd moved past fear, but because the clarity of what needed to happen had settled like electricity in my chest. Patricia hadn't just made a mistake. She'd built her authority by erasing the rules that protected the most vulnerable, and now I had the receipts. I sat at my desk while Emily slept upstairs, her breathing soft and steady through the baby monitor I still used, even though she insisted she didn't need it. On my second screen was the timeline I'd drafted, 7 families, including ours, each targeted by Patricia with modified or incomplete violation notices, each case missing the ADA accommodation clause when it should have been present. The timeline wasn't just data, it was a story, a pattern, something the press would understand, something a lawyer could argue, something a community could rally behind. I clicked open Carmen's statement again, her words echoing like a drumbeat. Patterned omission of federally protected clauses in official housing. Notices could constitute a civil rights violation under federal housing law. It was personal, but it was also bigger than us. The next morning, I made a decision. No more waiting, no more collecting. It was time to act. I sent Alyssa and Carmen a message. I'm going public. I'll start with the neighborhood group and escalate from there. Are you with me? Both responses came in within minutes. Absolutely. I'll comment the second you post. Do it. I'll monitor coverage and push to my contacts if it spreads. I opened the private community Facebook group and typed slowly, carefully. Hi neighbors, Daniel here. I want to share something disturbing I found while comparing HOA notices sent to different residents. Specifically, I discovered multiple violation letters, mine included, that are missing a legally required clause regarding federal disability accommodation. Other neighbors received letters with that clause. If this affects you or someone you know, please reach out. I've attached documentation below. I attached both PDFs, Carmen's statement, and added a link to the federal ADA housing requirement. Then I hit post. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the notifications started pouring in. Likes, comments, shares, messages, people tagging others. Stories I hadn't heard started emerging in the comments. My son uses a mobility device, and we were fined for adding a railing. They told my mother her oxygen tank needed to be out of sight. I thought I was the only one. Patricia didn't respond publicly, but I noticed something later that afternoon. The bulletin board at the community center had been wiped clean. Not updated. Wiped. The list of violations. Gone. The locked glass case. Empty. That told me everything I needed to know. I printed off hard copies of everything and delivered them, quietly, to Marcus. Slid the envelope under his door with a single note. This is what you didn't know. You need to read it. By evening, he texted me a single line. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Emily sat beside me as I read through the comments still pouring in. She didn't say much, but she leaned against me again, just like she did that night on the porch. I saw the lady at the board today, she whispered. She looked mad. I smiled gently. Let her be mad. We've got truth on our side. The community had seen what Patricia was doing, and for the first time, they were talking to each other instead of hiding behind closed doors. I didn't know yet what Marcus would say tomorrow, but I knew the wall of silence Patricia built was cracking, louder now, spreading. And I intended to drive something straight through it. Drop like if you've ever exposed something that needed daylight, and subscribe to see how this pressure turns into a reckoning. Marcus didn't ask me to meet at his house. He chose the library, a neutral space. No HOA flags, no surveillance signs, no board members wandering past pretending to garden. Just quiet shelves, a reading room, and the sound of someone turning pages nearby. He was already seated when I arrived, shoulders hunched, manila folder clasped tightly in both hands. He looked like he hadn't slept either. I read everything, he said before I could sit. All of it, I nodded. And? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the folder and slid out a single printed email. Patricia forwarded this to the board 3 months ago. She told us not to use Form ADA 14 in future notices unless the resident made a point of being litigious. He shook his head slowly, disgust bleeding into his voice. She said that word, litigious, like asking for a ramp makes someone dangerous. I leaned forward, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. Why didn't you say anything back then? I didn't think it would escalate. He exhaled shakily. But it always does, doesn't it? That's how she operates, 1 inch at a time until people stop pushing back. He slid more documents across the table, internal messages, meeting transcripts, and one line in a draft memo where Patricia suggested softly discouraging homeowners from requesting ADA modifications by citing community uniformity. She had buried discrimination under aesthetic language, weaponized silence. This is what I've been waiting for, I said. But I need your permission to include your name when I go wider. Without it, she'll claim the documents are fake. Marcus hesitated. His hands fidgeted. His voice dropped. I have 2 nephews, he said. One's autistic, the other has severe asthma. If someone pulled this on my brother's family, I'd be furious, and I'd want someone to speak up. Then he looked up, eyes steady. Use my name. I'll keep forwarding anything new I find, he added. But this has to be public. I'm contacting the press tomorrow, I said, and the city accessibility office. Good. He stood slowly. She won't be ready. After we parted ways, I drove past the old oak tree on my way home. Its limbs stretched wide across the entrance road like a gatekeeper, shadow spilling onto the pavement. That tree had seen generations come and go. But Patricia? She'd forgotten she was just a guest in its shade. That night, I stayed up formatting the report with Marcus's evidence. I inserted his quoted email. I built a timeline with his annotations. I labeled the sections clearly. Violation pattern. Email directives. Procedural irregularities. Deliberate omission. I gave it a title that said everything in 6 words. How the HOA erased the law. By sunrise, I'd scheduled the email blast. Press outlets, city offices, civil rights watchdogs. I even looped in a local podcaster known for tackling housing injustice stories. And last, I posted a public version of the file in the neighborhood group, this time with Marcus's name attached. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. The truth was finally loud enough to speak for itself. Reactions poured in all morning. Residents who had stayed silent were now tagging each other, commenting on their own stories. A man posted a picture of his son's therapy swing being removed for not matching the fence color. A woman uploaded a video of Patricia ignoring her when she mentioned ADA protections. And in the middle of it all, Marcus commented, as a board member, I was complicit in silence, but no longer. Daniel is right. Patricia erased legal protections, and we have the proof. That was the shift, not the outrage, not even the stories, the confession. A crack in Patricia's inner circle, and this time, it wasn't anonymous. I closed my laptop slowly and looked across the living room to where Emily sat, sketching at the dining table, headphones on, surrounded by color, safe, home, unmoved. That's what this fight was always about. And now, Patricia was officially on notice. I spent the next morning doing what engineers do best, building systems, not concrete, not steel, but proof, pressure, and a plan that couldn't be ignored. The file Marcus gave me had cracked the board's foundation, but now it was time to collapse it. I opened a clean digital workspace, laid out timelines, named every violation, linked every source. I tagged ADA infractions in red, added resident testimonials in blue, and internal emails in bold. It was no longer just a document. It was a machine designed to be read by reporters, regulators, and anyone who'd ever been bulldozed by bureaucracy. By noon, I'd turned that structure into something sharp enough to cut through silence. A press-ready deck, a social carousel, a one-pager titled Disability Discrimination by Design. Inside one, HOA's pattern of suppression. Every quote, every omission, every directive was there, laid out with clarity and intent. Patricia's words were no longer buried in back rooms. They were in 14-point font and heading straight for inboxes. I reached out to Carmen first. The evidence is aligned. We're ready to release. She replied with a single sentence. Send it. I've already prepped reporters. While waiting for her signal, I went door to door, not to confront, but to recruit. I visited Alyssa, then the elderly man with the service ramp violation, then a single mom who had been fined for her son's medical scooter being visible from the street. Every person had one thing in common. They thought they were alone. But now, with Marcus's name out in the open, they were ready to speak. I didn't give them scripts, just truth. I asked them to record their stories in their own voices, raw, real, filmed right from their phones. One by one, they emailed me clips. I spliced the videos together with minimal edits. No music, no dramatics, just human voices. My daughter was scared we'd be forced out. I felt ashamed for needing help. They treated me like I was less than a homeowner. The final clip was mine. Just a 30-second close-up. This is about more than HOA policy. It's about people who think power lets them erase federal law. It doesn't. Not anymore. I uploaded the finished video and titled it simply, "This is what they tried to silence." That night, I posted the video across every community channel, Facebook group, Nextdoor, even the HOA's public-facing announcement board, which, due to a loophole in the bylaws, had to allow open public comment if submitted digitally. I didn't sleep, again, but I watched. By midnight, the post had over 100 shares, neighbors, relatives, even people from nearby neighborhoods. Comments flooded in. They did this to my mom, too. My brother lives here. I'm sending this to him now. Why hasn't this been reported before? The video had only been up 5 hours when a local journalist messaged me directly. Can we talk tomorrow? This is the clearest breakdown I've seen of ADA housing violations in a residential HOAI, messaged Carmen. We're live, press is inbound. She replied, confirmed. I've pushed the file to HUD and the city ADA compliance office. You should expect a call this week. I exhaled. It was happening. One step left. I scheduled a resident forum under the community's open use clause, a rarely used rule that allowed any homeowner to request a forum if 5 or more households backed the request. Alyssa got 10 signatures in under an hour. The forum would be held at the community center. Thursday night. I submitted the notice officially. Patricia couldn't cancel it without violating the bylaws she wrote herself. She would have to sit in that room and listen. The plan wasn't just in motion, it was on record. Thursday came fast. The neighborhood buzzed with quiet energy, like something was shifting, but no one wanted to say it aloud. The forum notice had been printed and posted by law. Patricia hadn't dared remove it. The words, resident-led discussion on HOA conduct, were still taped to the glass case outside the community center that morning, fluttering slightly in the breeze. I arrived early, carrying my laptop, a stack of printed packets, and a single manila folder with Marcus's signed statement. The room was half full already. Neighbors who usually avoided meetings sat near the front, arms crossed, watching the door. The air smelled like folding chairs and faint nerves. Alyssa came in next, followed by 2 more residents I hadn't met before. They nodded to me, then quietly took seats near the back. I saw the elderly man who'd told me about the ramp violation, sitting beside his daughter. Even they had copies of the handout I'd emailed earlier. Word had traveled. At 6:58, Patricia walked in, alone. She scanned the room, trying to read the mood. But her usual steel confidence was dulled. I saw her eyes flick to the handouts, to the open laptop on the podium, to the camera someone had set up in the corner of the room. Her jaw tightened. She hadn't expected this many people, and she certainly hadn't expected us to be organized. I stepped up to the front and tapped the microphone. Thanks for coming, everyone. As you know, this is a resident-led forum authorized under Section 5, Clause C of our own HOA bylaws. Patricia opened her mouth, then shut it. She sat. We're here because several residents have raised concerns about discriminatory enforcement of HOA policies, specifically the removal of ADA accommodation clauses from violation notices, and the pattern of targeting families with disability-related needs. I clicked the remote. The projector lit up with the first slide, a side-by-side comparison of 2 letters, one with the clause, one without. Patricia's name stamped on both. This isn't speculation, it's documented. I moved quickly, slide after slide. Resident quotes, Marcus's email, federal regulations, Carmen's signed statement. I never raised my voice. I never accused. I just presented. Facts, timelines, violations, consequences. Alyssa stood next and read a short statement about her daughter's denied service animal. Then a father told the room how he'd removed a medical lift after getting a $400 fine. When Marcus walked in at 7:21, the room fell silent. He walked slowly to the front, unbuttoned his jacket, and looked directly at Patricia. I've been on this board for 8 years. I've stayed silent too long. But Daniel is right. The omission of ADA language wasn't an error. It was a decision. And it happened more than once. Gasps. One neighbor clapped once, awkwardly, then stopped. The tension in the room turned from simmer to boil. Patricia stood now. I won't be spoken to like this in a public ambush. I turned to face her. This isn't an ambush. It's accountability, and it's long overdue. The floor opened to questions. Residents asked about appeal options, legal recourse, and whether Patricia had the authority to change the notices herself. She deflected, stumbled, and finally sat back down without answering. The final resident to speak was a teenager, maybe 17, who said softly, "We live here too. We're not furniture. We're not violations. My brother's wheelchair ramp isn't a threat to anyone." Silence, then applause. The forum ended at 8:36 p.m. Patricia left without a word. I stayed behind, shaking hands, thanking people, collecting comments for follow-up. Someone suggested starting a recall petition. Someone else brought up calling the city ADA compliance officer. I didn't need to say much anymore. The story had moved beyond me, and the community had finally found its voice. Drop a like if you've ever watched someone in power finally be forced to listen, and subscribe if you want to see what happens when the entire neighborhood stands up at once. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The woman's voice was steady, professional, and very clear. "Mr. Morales, this is Evelyn Kent, Deputy Director of ADA Compliance for the City of Riverside. We've reviewed the documentation you submitted, including resident testimonies and evidence of policy suppression. I'm confirming receipt of a formal inquiry into your HOA's practices under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. You'll receive a written response within 10 business days. If additional residents are willing to speak on record, our office is open to immediate interviews." I played it twice, then forwarded it to Carmen and Marcus. The strategy wasn't just in motion anymore. It was landing. By noon, the forum video had reached over 2,000 views, shared by neighbors, disability rights groups, even a city council member who commented, "Disability discrimination has no place in this community. We'll be watching closely." Patricia hadn't made a single public statement. Not in the Facebook group, not on Nextdoor, not even through the HOA's email channel, but her silence wasn't passive. It was panic. I saw the signs: sudden cancellation of the monthly HOA newsletter, her name pulled from the speaker schedule for next week's board session, and, most telling, an emergency closed-door meeting called by the remaining board members for policy review. I knew what that meant: damage control. She was trying to contain a fire that had already jumped the fence. Still, I wasn't taking chances. I met with Alyssa and 2 other residents in my garage, now turned temporary headquarters. The folding table was covered in legal pads, petition forms, and hand-marked HOA maps. "We're going for a special election," I told them. "The bylaws allow it with 15% of homeowner signatures. If we get the votes, we can force a full board recall." Alyssa flipped her pen once between her fingers. "Do you think we'll get them?" I didn't hesitate. "We already have them. They just haven't had a reason to show up before now." We broke into teams. Each pair got a packet of addresses, a folder with evidence summaries, and a simple message. This is about justice, not politics, not power, just doing what's right. By evening, we had 63 signatures. That was more than enough. I sent Marcus the final count. He replied in 2 words: "Deliver it." So I did. At exactly 6:05 p.m., I walked up to the HOA office, a single-story brick building with one flickering outdoor light, and slid the notarized petition packet into the legal submission box. The moment it dropped, I felt it in my chest like a closing latch. We weren't asking for permission anymore. We were invoking the rules she thought no one would ever use against her. At home, Emily was curled up on the couch, her sketch pad open across her knees. She looked up as I came in. "Did you do it?" I smiled. "We did." She grinned and pointed to a drawing she'd been working on. A wide, leafy tree with a swing hanging from one branch and little hearts carved into the trunk. "The old oak," she said, "but I gave it a name." "What name?" She turned the sketch pad so I could read the label under the drawing. "Strong Enough." I sat beside her, resting my hand on her shoulder. That tree had stood longer than any of us. But what we were doing now, this resistance, this reclaiming, it wasn't just about standing, it was about growing. The next HOA meeting was scheduled in 3 days. Patricia would be there, whether she wanted to or not. And we weren't walking in alone. The community center was packed, not politely full, overflowing. People stood in the back, clustered near the windows, voices low but electric with anticipation. I saw faces I'd never seen at an HOA meeting in the 5 years I'd lived here. Young couples, retirees, single parents, and even a teenager holding a sign that said simply, "We still live here." Patricia was already at the board table when I walked in. Her posture was sharp, her blazer crisp, but the tension in her jaw gave her away. Marcus sat beside her, calm, pen in hand, papers neatly stacked. He gave me a subtle nod as I passed. He wasn't just attending, he was ready. I stepped to the podium as the moderator called the meeting to order. "This session is open for community comment regarding item 12, he said, special review of board conduct and recall petition. That's when it started. One by one, neighbors stood. Alyssa was first. She read a single sentence. "My daughter was treated like a liability. No child should feel that way in her own home." Then she handed the mic to the next speaker without another word. The next man spoke of his elderly father, whose request for a temporary ramp was denied by Patricia's office twice, until he stopped asking and paid for a permanent modification himself. "It cost more than a month's worth of groceries," he said, voice cracking. "But I did it to keep him safe. No one should have to choose like that." Applause followed, not rowdy, but purposeful. Patricia stiffened visibly as more testimonies poured out. No yelling, no name-calling, just clarity. Then Marcus stood. He didn't speak from his seat. He walked to the center, faced the crowd, and held up a piece of paper. "This is the internal memo I received 3 months ago," he said, his voice level. "It explicitly instructs board members to omit federal accommodation language from notices deemed low risk for legal challenge." Patricia Langston signed that memo. Gasps. He continued. "I regret not speaking up sooner, but now I ask this board and all of you to act, not later, now." I stepped forward last, bringing with me the printed packet we'd delivered for the petition. I didn't need to raise my voice. You've heard what we've documented. You've seen the video. You've read Marcus's statement. This isn't a personal vendetta. It's a systemic failure, and it started at the top. Then I turned to Patricia directly. "And it ends tonight." The moderator cleared his throat, clearly shaken. "We have received the required number of signatures for a special vote. Per HOA rules, we must now proceed to item 13. He looked at Patricia. "Would you like to respond before we move forward?" Patricia stood slowly. She adjusted her blazer, walked to the microphone, and stared at the room. But she didn't speak. Not at first. Her eyes swept over the faces, resolute, unblinking. And in that moment, her silence said more than a speech could have. She finally leaned in. "I will not contest the petition." No apology, no admission, just that. She turned, walked out of the room, and didn't look back. The crowd didn't cheer, they exhaled. A deep collective release, like a pressure valve, finally turned. The moderator nodded and resumed. "The board will reconvene in 1 week with nominations for interim roles." Marcus raised his hand. "I move to appoint Daniel Morales as acting compliance advisor for ADA matters until a permanent vote is held." A voice from the crowd seconded, and just like that, the motion passed. Not with fanfare, but with resolve. The room didn't empty for a long time. People stayed, talked, hugged, laughed. It was like the community had remembered itself. I stepped outside, where Emily stood beneath the old oak tree, her sketch pad tucked under her arm. She looked up as I approached. "Is it over?" she asked. I smiled. "Number. But now, it's ours." Emily tucked her sketch pad under one arm and slipped her hand into mine. We didn't talk as we walked back to the house. Didn't need to. The air felt different. Not just because Patricia was gone, but because the neighborhood wasn't. Porch lights were on. People stood out front, waving. Someone even whistled as we passed, a kind of cheer that didn't need a banner or a speech. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and dropped the folder of petitions onto the table. It slid a little before stopping at the corner, right where my sister's photo still sat in its frame. I looked at her for a moment, just breathing. "We did it, Nat," I whispered. "Your daughter's safe, and the board won't touch this house again. Not with fear, not with silence, not with fine print threats." The next day, the city's ADA compliance office followed up. Patricia's name had been added to a preliminary inquiry list. Carmen forwarded the official report. HUD was opening a separate investigation based on sustained, patterned non-compliance with federal housing law. But what hit hardest wasn't legal. It was personal. A man I'd never met rang the doorbell mid-morning. 60s, white baseball cap, old boots. He introduced himself as George, said he lived 3 blocks down. "My wife passed last year," he said. "She used a cane. Patricia fined us twice for the ramp I built, even though it didn't touch the sidewalk. I didn't fight it, I just paid." He paused, voice catching. "Wish I'd known someone like you was here." "You still do," I said, and invited him in for coffee. By evening, we'd set up a working group, Marcus, Alyssa, George, 3 others from the petition, and me. We met in my garage, folding chairs and all. Not to tear things down, but to build what should have been here all along. The rules weren't the enemy. It was how they'd been twisted. We weren't against structure, we were against cruelty dressed up as order. And we wanted safeguards, new protocols, clear ADA language in every notice, a rotating accessibility advisor position, open records access, a resident hotline, monthly community walkthroughs with the board, no more closed doors. We wrote the draft charter that night. 2 days later, I stood beneath the oak tree while Emily helped Marcus tape a paper lantern to a string of lights overhead. The whole cul-de-sac had come out. It wasn't a protest or a party. It was just people being neighbors again. Someone rolled out a grill. Kids drew chalk hearts on the pavement. Emily handed out sketchpad portraits she'd drawn of the folks who spoke up at the meeting. Alyssa's daughter came up to me quietly. She didn't say anything, just held out a drawing Emily had made. It was the tree again, but this time there were people under it. All of us. "You're the reason I'm not scared of that office anymore," she said. I crouched to her level. "You don't ever have to be. That office works for you now." By dusk, the air buzzed with music and laughter, a rare kind of calm that only happens when something dangerous has finally passed. But as I looked around, I didn't see an ending. I saw a beginning. This fight wasn't just about the fines or the notices or even Patricia. It was about remembering what a neighborhood's supposed to feel like. Not compliance, not punishment, belonging, and legacy. It's not made of brick or title deeds. It's made of the hands that rebuild what someone else tried to break. Justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it starts on a porch, with your niece at your side and the truth in your hands. If you've ever faced HOA abuse or been silenced by a rule meant to keep you small, share your story in the comments. We see you. We are you. Let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you believe communities should protect, not punish.